Hi, I'm Brian Whitney, and on behalf of Bardavon Presents, welcome to Game Changers. Tonight's Game Changer is Citizen Kane, a film that has topped countless lists of the greatest movies ever made and holds a permanent place in the history of cinema. What can be said about Citizen Kane that hasn't already been said by filmmakers, critics, and fans alike?
It is just one of the great movies ever made, and I think many people are going to agree. It's just one of the great American experiences in the cinema.
Greatest American film as far as I'm concerned.
This is the gold standard here.
It's pretty hard to top Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made.
Do you agree?
No, certainly not.
This is Orson Welles, the writer and director of Citizen Kane. At the end of the 1930s, Orson Welles was already a superstar of stage and of radio. His 1936 staging of Macbeth with an entirely African-American cast was a huge success, and subsequently he became notorious for his adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, a production so convincing that members of the audience truly believed that aliens had landed in New Jersey. The film industry was desperate to bring Wells to Hollywood, and when he finally relented, RKO Pictures offered him a two-picture deal with full creative control. RKO wasn't even allowed to see any footage until Wells gave them permission. Giving creative control to a 25-year-old with no filmmaking experience was completely unprecedented, and many Hollywood insiders were aghast at the idea. This was the beginning of sentiment against Wells and Kane. More was to follow. Wells' success in other artistic fields and his lack of knowledge of filmmaking proved to be valuable in making Citizen Kane, as he knew what he wanted Kane to be and wasn't aware of what couldn't be done. Wells was also adept at identifying talented technicians who were able to make Kane the way he wanted it. Perhaps none of those collaborators were more important than cinematographer Greg Toland. Although also young, Toland had a wealth of experience, having been nominated for the Academy Award for Best Cinematography in 3 of the 4 years before making Kane, and winning for 1939's Wuthering Heights. Toland pioneered the use of chiaroscuro lighting, heavily contrasting between light and dark, as well as deep focus shots. By using lenses with a small aperture and increasing the amount of lighting on the set, the camera was able to focus on the background and the foreground in the same shot. Wells valued Toland's contribution to Kane so highly that he shared a card with him in the credits of the film, as opposed to his own independent director card. While deep focus had been used earlier, it was the combination of deep focus and long, unbroken takes that made Kane stand out. The Wells-Toland style of deep focus went on to dominate the look of American black and white filmmaking through the 1960s. The visual style of the film was further enhanced by editor Linwood Dunn, who pioneered a process called optical printing, which allowed multiple takes to be combined into a single shot. This technique allowed Wells and his collaborators to achieve shots not possible with the technology of 1941.
He used it like a paintbrush, and that was fine with me, except he was asking for things that I'd never done before, and they were not feasible, and they were not going to look good, such as a zoom on top of a zoom, and the quality would be bad. However, he had enough power at the studio to okay the money and the time it would take to do these things, and so I was happy to go ahead, and I learned a lot on it, and most everything he wanted came out all right. For example, even in the library where we have the gal sitting on the bench and the base of a statue that says Thatcher on her left. So he said when he was editing, well, I'd rather start up on the statue and just pan down and then back, just like it was there. And they said, well, there's no statue on the film.
You didn't have a statue on the set?
Oh, no, just the base of it. And so I had a statue made about 2 feet high. I made a straight shot of that, and then on the optical printer, I made a motorized pan down from it, and then a pan from the scene of the girl, and then matched it with a traveling split screen.
Under which you may inspect certain portions of Mr. Thatcher's unpublished memoir.
And so many of the devotees of Citizen Kane couldn't believe that those things were done, and I could go on, like in the Opera House, Comingore singing on the stage, and the camera going up into the wings, and the 2 men up on the platform reacting to her singing. And Wells said, well, I want more travel, like we're going way, way up there. So we built a miniature and made a split screen and panned onto the miniature and then off to the miniature up to the scene above and fitted it in between.
Another key collaborator on Kane was makeup artist Maurice Siderman. When Wells came to RKO, Siderman was only an apprentice, but he had a reputation as inventive and creatively precise, exactly the kind of technician that Wells was looking for. Siderman used plaster casting to create molds that could then be directly attached to the actors to represent different stages of aging. This then new method was very effective, but required a lot of Wells. The oldest incarnation of Kane required 3.5 hours in the makeup chair. Wells would arrive at the studio at 2:30 a.m. on these days to begin the process of transforming into the elder Kane. Siderman's tour de force, the breakfast montage, was shot in a single day, where Kane ages 12 years over the course of 6 shots. In 1941, film studios did not credit apprentices for their work on films, so Kane has no makeup credit. Instead, Wells took out a large ad in the Los Angeles newspapers thanking Siderman, who he called the best makeup artist in the world. Another notable contributor who made his motion picture debut on Citizen Kane was composer Bernard Herrmann. Wells was experienced in radio broadcasts, which were typically scored with many small, short pieces of music rather than the fewer, longer pieces used in film at the time. Herrmann was able to adapt this radio-style scoring for Kane, and as such, established himself as an important figure in the world of music composition. He went on to score numerous films for Alfred Hitchcock, Francois Truffaut, Brian De Palma, and his final score, Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Other important collaborators that helped to make Kane look and feel the way it does were art director Perry Ferguson, special effects supervisor Vernon Walker, and perhaps most notoriously, screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz. Originally hired as a script doctor, Mankiewicz contributed so much to Citizen Kane that Wells shared the screenwriting credit with him. Exactly who wrote how much of Kane is a mystery that may never be solved. Film critic Pauline Kael's 1971 essay Raising Kane claims that Mankiewicz is responsible for the entirety of the script. Filmmaker, critic, and Kingston native Peter Bogdanovich wrote a rebuttal of that idea in his 1972 Esquire magazine piece, The Kane Mutiny. The idea that Mankiewicz alone wrote Citizen Kane has been debunked by several film scholars throughout the subsequent decades. However, David Fincher's 2020 film Mank is based on the premise of the Kael essay. Although Fincher himself states, "It was not my interest to make a movie about a posthumous credit arbitration. I was interested in making a movie about a man who agreed not to take any credit and then changed his mind. That was interesting to me." The story of Kane is ultimately what doomed its initial release, as Kane was said to be a thinly veiled analog for powerful newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst, and specifically references his affair with actress Marion Davies, a closely guarded secret. While Hearst himself was said to be angered by the film, he didn't directly stop it from being shown. It was Hollywood's fear of Hearst's reaction that led the industry to shut the film down itself. Other studios tried to bribe RKO to destroy the film's negatives. Theaters refused to show it, and the film was shut out of the 1941 Academy Awards. As Kael put it best in Raising Kane, the movie industry is always frightened, and it is always proudest of films that celebrate courage. While Citizen Kane was a box office bomb in 1941, it still ended up becoming influential. The reason, as with another box office bomb of the era, The Wizard of Oz, was television. In the late 1950s, TV began showing Kane regularly, where it found a new, wider audience.
The first time I saw Citizen Kane was on Channel 9 in New York. I think I was 15 years old, and it was at the age when I was beginning to associate certain names with films that I liked. What Citizen Kane really did for me was to show what that name on the film did. In other words, Wells was the one, through Citizen Kane, to make me understand what a director did in a film, where he placed the camera, the energy of the film editing, the performances. All of this had a certain mark and a stamp that was unmistakable. When I first saw it on Channel 9, it was edited. But I didn't know. It didn't matter. It didn't matter because it was so arresting. It was so shocking. I really, of course, fell in love with that wide-angle lens, too. In movement, constantly in movement. That was fascinating to me. And then I finally got to see it in the theater, at the Thalia Theater in New York, seeing for the first time the scenes that I hadn't seen on television, particularly the March of Time sequence.
News on the march!
And when it came up was quite shocking, and how the March of Time sequence developed in the film. And I hadn't seen that before ever. And it was really, really extraordinary.
This led a whole new generation of filmmakers to discover Kane and apply its masterful techniques to a whole new era of films. Ultimately, the technical advances and industry drama wouldn't matter very much if the film wasn't worth watching, but it is. Wells and his collaborators were masterful storytellers that used these new, experimental techniques to make a film that's entertaining no matter how many times you watch it. Thanks for coming out to the movies tonight, and we hope you enjoy the film.